In this video, I'm going to introduce you to group calling using Sendbird Calls, and we're going to try it out in JavaScript. I'm KC Kern. I'm the product manager for Sendbird Calls. Let's get started. So I'm here on Sendbird.com, and I'm assuming that you don't even have an account at this point. So you can follow along as I sign up. The first thing I've got to input here is some basic information. I'm going to sign up as John Doe using a burner account. I'll be in the United States and using a burner email. Okay, so the first thing it asks me for is what's my organization name. In most cases, this is going to be your company name. If this is a hobby project, this might be your family name. I'm going to put my company. All right. Next, it's going to be asking me to create my first application. Now, since we want to try out group calling here, I'm going to choose chat plus calls, and I'm going to put group call test app. And I will pick West Coast US as my region. Okay, so once this application is created, I can proceed with setting up some users. Now, the users are kind of the foundation of being able to do any activity on a Sendbird app because we are a communications platform. So I'm going to create 3 users here. I'm going to create A, B, and C. Just keep it simple. Okay. Now let's look at the calls menu. So here we have direct calls, which is our one-on-one calling, and this is where you see call logs. This is a brand new application, so we don't see anything here yet. But then group calls is where we would see rooms. So a room is what has to be created in order to host a group call where multiple participants can come in. So in order to actually participate in a group call using this platform, we have to use the Sendbird Calls SDK and build it into an actual web app in which this experience can take place. So our objective here is to take our 3 users, A, B, and C, and have them participate in a group call that would take place in a room that will appear here. So let's have a look at a sample app. If you check the description for this video, you'll see a link to GitHub, which will have the code base for a sample app. I've got it downloaded and available here in my IDE. So the first thing to do is just to fire it up in a local browser. So I'm just going to type npm start. You'll have to do a npm install before you get to this step. I've already done that. So this is a pretty typical React app. I'm assuming a base level of understanding of how this works. So once this starts, it's going to fire up here in a development server, which will be accessible through localhost port 3000. So as you can see here, we are now in the Sendbird Calls sample application where we have the option to do a direct call or a group call. So we are focusing on group calls, so I'm going to go into here. And the first thing that it's asking me is, what is your app ID and what is your user ID? So let's go back to our dashboard and collect that information. If I go to my overview, we can find that I have the application ID listed right here. I'm going to hit copy, and I am going to put it right there. Now for my user ID, you'll remember we just created 3 new users, keeping it simple. We have both the ID and the nickname. I'll change the nickname here just to demonstrate that nicknames can be changed, whereas IDs are fixed. So I'm going to log in as user A on the app ID that we've created here. So I'm going to sign in. Okay, so I have 2 options next. I can either create a room or I can enter with the room ID. Now you will recall that we currently don't have any rooms registered on our app. So that leaves us with no choice but to create a room. So I'm going to push create. Okay, so it created the room and it brought me into the room and then gives me the room ID, which then I can copy in order to share with somebody else or to create an invitation. So let's look at our group calls menu now, and you'll see that this room ID has now been created. And look who's in it. User A is in it. So a group call isn't much use just with a single user. So what we're going to try to do now is log in as a different user on this same app and enter this same room. Let's give that a try. So I'm going to open this localhost 3000 in a new tab here. The difference is, instead of logging in as user A, what I'm going to do is log in as user B. And now I'm faced with the same option. Do I create a new room or do I enter with the room ID? Now, in this case, I want to enter into the pre-existing room ID. Okay, now I'm going to hit enter here. And now user B has now entered the room. Now, what I'm going to do here is try out my camera off option. Now you can see we just have some colored bars here. This is simulating a camera. So user B now has his camera off, and I am user B in this tab. If I go to this other tab, I am user A, and you can see that user B then has their camera off. So let me do the same thing one more time with user C, and let's get 3 people in this group call. And again, I'm going to use the same room ID to join. And here we are, 3 users in a room. I can turn on the cameras. No problem there. And this can go up to 6 in its current form, although we do expect that number to go up. Let's check our dashboard. If we look here in group calls, we still have 1 room ID, but now we have 3 users in it. Now, the current participants, those that are currently in the room, are on the left, and that actually corresponds to what we see on the right, which is actually a participant log. So if one of these were to leave the room, so C just left the room, and now we have an exited at timestamp here. And we see that C was in this room for 56 seconds, whereas A and B are still currently in the room. Now, if I were to return into the room as C, I can do that. Everyone else that's in the room is shows up there also. And now you see that C shows up there twice. And the reason is that this actually represents a session, which is a moment in time. So these have started but have not exited. C entered, and then he left, and then returned. Now here we actually logged in with individual users. The same user can actually enter the same room multiple times. So I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna log in as C again, and I'm going to again go into this same room ID. And here we are with user C represented 2 times in this. Now you may ask, well, what's the point of that? Well, there are many cases in which the same user might want to be in the call as 2 participants. For example, if one is on a mobile device and the other is on a desktop, or one is showing something with a camera, whereas the other one is showing a face. The participant concept does not map to user one-to-one. One user can have multiple participants in a single room, be that simultaneously through different devices, or in this case, different browser tabs, or over time. As we see here, that that C is currently in the room 2 times, or rather, there are 2 participants that are attached to user C, whereas in the log we have 3 because one of them has already left. So as throughout the life cycle of a room, you're going to have users that come in as participants, and the participant is more or less represents a session on a device or a tab over time, whereas the user ID itself is persistent across all of that. So that's an important point there, just to understand the mapping of, you have app, and within app you can have multiple rooms, and then within rooms you have participants which are each associated with a user, but one user could be expressed as a participant on a one-to-many relationship. Okay, so I think that covers the conceptual design of what we're dealing with here in group calls. We create rooms, we enter rooms, and then we can interact within the room. We can leave, we can come through. Let me show you what happens if somebody leaves the room. So here's our duplicate C. I'm going to end the call there, and now you'll see from the point of view of user A, we only have 3 participants. And if I were to do the same with the other users, we can pare this down until we're just left with 1. Okay, now let's jump into the code base and the documentation. Now I have a document right here which reflects the documentation which you'll find on sendbird.com/docs. And this goes through the actual SDK public interface, showing the various functions that are available and how they're implemented. So you can see that the general outline here is, well, we create a room, we enter a room, we interact within a room, we display our video view, we handle events in a room, we reconnect the media stream in case of a disconnection, and then we can exit a room. So based on what we just saw in the demo, I think you can see where each of these events get implemented, and these show the interfaces that would be used during those events. So if you're familiar with the Sendbird Calls SDK at all, you'll know that this call object is kind of the core of all of the operations that occur. And Sendbird Call object now has create room and fetch room by ID. Let's actually search for this inside of the code base here, and we can see this in action. Okay, here we go. So I just did a search here for this particular function, and we can see that it is part of create room here, and events are dispatched in consequence to having created a room. Let me actually look through the file hierarchy a little bit. I won't get too deep into the architecture of this app, although you are welcome to explore it. But what you'll find is here in pages, we have group call main. And this is where a lot of the core functionality is occurring. That so we just saw the create room. The next one that you'll find here is to enter a room. And the first thing that you have to do there is to fetch the room by ID. As we saw, that we provided that room ID as we were entering it. And that gets then pushed down into this function. And the fetch room by ID will actually return a room object. So the room object then does the rest of the work, where you can access, for example, the various participants in the room. So we have 2 concepts here: the local participant, which is singular, and that represents the actual user using the app. And then you have you have remote participants as well. So first, as we saw in the demo, the local participant can mute their microphone, can unmute a microphone, can stop video and start video. Those are all ways to interact within a room, as we saw previously using the buttons that were in the bottom. So let's actually see if we can find this in the code base. And here it is. And you can see that it's attached to the mute button. So we have our various UI elements, which are defined, and then the local participant dot mute microphone or stop video then get attached to the actions that are tied to the UI elements. So the one part that's a little more tricky is how do we actually display the video view? Again, I would refer you to the documentation here. But the key element here is that we are actually first creating an HTML element which has an ID, and it's a video tag, and then we map our stream to that tag so that it knows, so that the stream that's coming in through the Sendbird Calls SDK knows where to display it on the screen. So let me just do a quick search here for, where do we actually see a video element used? And we can see that here we have a media content file, and we have, it's a video element. It's set to autoplay. The muted setting is defined by the configurations in the app. And based on whether the video is enabled or not, we either, if it's not available, we just put the avatar and the ID, what we would show when the camera is off. Otherwise, we actually show the video stream as it's being received from the SDK. So the same applies both to the local view and to the remote view. The difference is the remote participants, even if there's only one, it will exist in an array. And then each participant needs to be handled and configured based on the information that we get about them from the SDK. So now let's look at some of the event handlers. We've got a number of events that then we can tie UI actions to. For example, on remote participant entered. So the SDK is basically going to fire an event that says, hey, a remote participant has just entered. What should we do about that? And that's where, if you want to play a sound, or if you want to, send a notification or something, that's where you would put that code. And then you actually have to display the video of the new person that entered, or the avatar, or however you have it configured. It all has to be tied to that event. So we have participant entered, participant exited, remote audio settings changed, remote video settings changed. Again, this is if they mute themselves, or if they don't, you can show a little icon, and these events will allow you to know when that changes, and will enable the UI to be updated accordingly. Okay, and then when the call is over, which is really only from the point of view of a single user, right? These rooms are persistent, but you can participate in the sense of you enter the room and then you exit a room, and from the vantage point of that user, that is the call. So you can exit the room just using this function, and we can see that is going to be tied. We search for room exit here, that is tied to the end button here. So there's a lot that goes into this application to make it to try to mimic the experience that we've grown accustomed to in remote work and remote connection settings. But scattered throughout this is the SDK through the room object and through the Sendbird call object, which then govern all of the events and the actions that then go into making a group call. So, this was a very cursory overview of how this is all put together, but I hope you're now empowered with all the pieces that you need. You have a sample application that you can look through. You know how to identify the SDK public interfaces that are being used in the app. You have some base level documentation about how to move forward building the SDK into an app. And then, of course, you have the dashboard where you can manage your users and manage your rooms in which the group calls are happening. So I hope this has been helpful. Again, Sendbird.com has a lot of resources that will be helpful for developers to create the types of voice and video calling experiences in their apps that they're hoping for. And we are very excited to see what you do with the SDK. And I wish you all the absolute best. Thank you.